welcome to our first Library Live lecture of the year. This is the kickoff event for the fall, and we're just really excited. The energy was so high in the green room for our speaker tonight, and I learned so much about ocean conservation just in 3 or 4 minutes. Plus, I'd like to suggest also that as a board member on the foundation and also as a Library Live committee member, I'm just thrilled to be part of the whole organization and the ability to produce programs of high quality throughout the year. So thank you all for coming. And the Library Live series is organized and presented by the Newport Beach Library Foundation. Our programs are funded entirely with your financial contributions from sponsors and other foundation members like you. Foundation would like to thank the following people for sponsoring tonight. Lauren Blackwood, who's here, and Sam and Tammy Tang. So our next Library Live speaker is on the 8th of November, Jonathan Bloom. He's going to be speaking about his book, The American Wasteland, and will be sharing new trends that will inspire you to become part of the Green Revolution. We have a special guest, Bill Bracken, who will be serving gourmet food. It is repurposed. You all know what repurposed means. But he's going to be serving food out in the back. He's just a wonderful, giving person, and his food truck is up in the Santa Ana area. And now I'm excited to introduce you to Michelle Sharon, who is a co-chair of the Surfrider Foundation, and also, what impressed me, a graduate of Caltech in chemical engineering. Probably most of us cannot say that. Michelle has been with the Surfrider Foundation for 9 years as a volunteer, and will be introducing our keynote speaker tonight, who I have had before at several talks and who I know you will thoroughly enjoy. The Surfrider Foundation is dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's beaches, waves, and oceans through a powerful activist network. Michelle is passionate about protecting the ocean and beaches, and has also, with the Surfrider Foundation, has brought in many new volunteers to become involved. She is not only a graduate of Caltech, she also is an adjunct professor at 3 different universities. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. And at the end of the program, Dr. Dedina will be signing books at the front. He has 4 published books, and you'll probably find out that he's also rerunning for mayor of Imperial Beach. So you can cast your absentee ballot. Michelle, please join us.
Serge Dedina was elected mayor of Imperial Beach in 2014. He is also the co-founder and executive director of Wild Coast, an international organization that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and wildlife. Serge has received the Surf Industry's Environmental Award, the San Diego Zoological Society's Conservation Medal, as well as the California Coastal Commission's Coastal Hero Award in recognition of his conservation achievements. Serge is an avid surfer, swimmer, and former state of California ocean lifeguard. He is the author of Saving the Gray Whale, Wild Sea, Eco Wars and Surf Stories from the Coast of the Californias, and Surfing the Border. He received a PhD in geography from the University of Texas at Austin. Please welcome Dr. Serge Dedina.
Thanks, everybody. I want to thank the Library Foundation. Michelle, thanks. I've been a member of the Surfrider Foundation since it started. I think it was in the early 80s. In fact, the first victory of the Surfrider Foundation was in Imperial Beach, where we worked with scientists at Scripps to stop the Army Corps of Engineers from building a mile-long breakwater off of our beach that would have killed the surf and been a disaster forever. So thanks to the Surfrider. I'm still a member. We still write a check every year and work really closely with the Surfrider Foundation. Thank you, Toby. And Toby's friend James Clark, who's here, is a very good friend of mine and colleague. He ran the Smart Border Coalition, an organization in San Diego that works across the border in Tijuana as well to really promote cross-border relations, something that is more important than ever, and something that if you're a surfer, you do every day when you go down to Baja and get good waves. So thanks, James, for allowing me to continue to get good waves in Baja with all my friends in Mexico. I'm going to talk about, let me back up. If you're expecting doom and gloom, you're not getting it here, okay? I hope you're going to leave being inspired by our wonderful coast and ocean. And it was really nice, right before I was going to come on, Rich Gurman, thank you, gave me his beautiful book, Blue Laguna. We have very good friends in common, a paddleboard's perspective of what's offshore of Laguna. And amazing photos. And so that's something, that I'm going to really talk to you about. I'm going to show you a little video first. But, I took the train up and people are asking me, why you take the train? Well, of course, the surf was firing everywhere. It was beautiful. And all of us Californians know that October is the best month of the year, right? We know that. We can't wait for summer to be over, everyone to leave. We get our beach back. It empties out. And now we know the weather's better than ever. So anyway, today, of course, the surf was firing in Del Mar. Of course, it was firing at Trestles. There was no wind. And I'm like, well, if I can't be on the beach and in the water taking a break, at least I can observe it. So it really reminded me of the power of the ocean, the power of the coast, and why, whether it's in Laguna or offshore, the power of this blue wilderness we have in California and around the world to really inspire us, but also about why it's so important and why we should conserve it. So before that, I'm going to show you a little video of the work that I do at Wild Coast. We're an international conservation team that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and wildlife. Think the Nature Conservancy meets World Wildlife Fund, but with 20 staff. We work in California to help protect our marine protected areas, as well as all the way down to southern Mexico to help protect and conserve some of Mexico's greatest national parks and most important wildlife areas. I'm going to talk to you tonight about how you successfully conserve the ocean. I want to leave you guys with some hope and show you that we can do conservation. Conservation does work, and that if we do the right things in the ocean, it's amazing the miracles that happen. So I'll show you a cool little video we did with Greg Long, the world's greatest big wave surfer this summer in La Jolla, and then we'll get going on.
People will never go out of their way to protect anything unless they really care for it. My name is Greg Long, a passionate big wave surfer and environmental activist. I spent the better part of 15 years in search of the biggest waves I could possibly find and ride, but really life's about not what you accomplish, but what you're leaving behind. What if we protected our coastlines instead of trashing them? That's what Wild Coast does.
Basically, we help to preserve the most amazingly beautiful places in the ocean and the wildlife that thrive there. We really make sure that everyone has access to them, that kids can get out on the water, that we can really get to know these areas that belong to all of us.
A big part of getting people to care and want to protect something is making sure that they love and they're passionate about it as well, and there's no better way to do that than actually getting them in the water.
There's some copepods. There's a lot of good stuff in this one.
To be with a brand that supports those initiatives and sees that as a vital part of the fabric of their brand, and to inspire and draw out of the athletes that they support is unprecedented, really. I don't see being involved with Cliff as a job in any way, as it is really just a privilege.
we had Greg out this summer in La Jolla and on a boat in San Diego Bay doing marine science education with kids from Native American communities in San Diego County. Wild Coast shirt, thank you. Awesome. And in San Diego County, and then kids from around the country, Native American kids, with a group like Native Like Water. And it was an incredibly moving experience. We had kids, when we went out to Cabrillo National Monument, which obviously is named for the Portuguese explorer that, and when he came, that meant a different era for our Native American populations that radically dropped, and Spanish colonization, et cetera. But it was a really moving time because a lot of Native American kids on that trip are up in the mountains. But if you look at the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, for example, they used to own La Jolla. And so I was with the elders of the La Jolla Band last year, and for them, when they lived in La Jolla, it wasn't 100 years ago, it was yesterday. And it was a really moving experience to take their kids back to La Jolla, get them. Some of these kids had never been to the beach before, never been on a kayak. There was one kid that was terrified of being on a kayak, and we got him to go in the sea caves in La Jolla. So it was really, really great. And it's really, really important to make sure that we all have access to the coast and ocean. And that's because, as we know, and I think for a lot of us who've grown up in Southern California, we live near the beach. We are the beach. Our whole life is about the coast and ocean. It's, that we can't even conceptualize that not being part of our life. It's weird to think that there are kids in Southern California and folks who never get to the ocean, right? And it's amazing to see that's a big deal now in Southern California, to make sure kids in Compton or kids in Barrio Logan or kids in El Cajon or kids in East Orange County or Santa Ana can actually get to the beach and enjoy it. And what we know about that is that experience with the outdoors has the power to transform them and change their lives, and getting them engaged in outdoor education and outdoor recreation. And there's some amazing programs in Orange County that do that at Newport Harbor and obviously Dana Point. And it's really, really important. And I had that opportunity here in Southern California. That's me on the right with my crazy Uncle Emil, my mom, and my little brother Nicky. That's in San Felipe in, I think, 1971 or 72. My parents were immigrants from Europe. My dad came over from France, his Jewish family, to escape the Nazi occupation of Europe. My mom was bombed by the Germans in London during the Blitz, and they found escape. And they ended up, long story how they ended up in LA in the early 60s, where I was born. They found escape and nirvana on the beaches of California, where my dad said, everyone's a millionaire in Southern California on the beach, right? It is the great melting pot. My dad, mom, dad, and I believe it, said we were on the beach in Malibu in the 60s with the Hilton family, right? I mean, right, they were there, everyone's there. All the hippies around the beach. You couldn't tell who was living near a dumpster or who was living in a mansion, right? And that's what I love about our gorgeous California coastline. And that's my dad. That's Cardiff by the sea in, I think, 77, where I learned how to surf in our amazing California state parks. I grew up in California state parks, camping in California state parks, ended up becoming a state lifeguard. My kids are state lifeguards. Anyone can criticize this state, and I love California. I love our culture of state parks, state beaches. I love being in Huntington State Beach for the state lifeguard championships in the summer, and what I see is, in addition to libraries being the great town centers, and this is an amazing library, and thank you for supporting it, by the way. We just built a new ocean library in IB. It's a beautiful, gorgeous, ocean-themed library, and it's actually so beautiful, I almost cry sometimes being in there, because I grew up in that library as myself, and I see all these kids there and stuff, and there's nothing more powerful than libraries except a beach, right? No, what I mean by that is I go to Huntington State Beach in the summer, and I see families from every country, every demographic group, every cultural group, and I see kids playing together. They don't have their iPhones. And what do they have on their faces? They're smiling, right? Hey, we all know that. That's priceless. Except in the water with the old silverbacks, you don't see a lot of anger on the beach, okay? I don't know what it is about old surfers, but anyway, and localism, which is crazy, right? And I'm not sure why surfers get so angry, but that's important. And that was my life in growing up in Southern California. We just loaded up the station wagon. We were in Arroyo Seco. Michelle grew up. It turns out we grew up not very far from each other. I think I'm a little bit older than she is. A lot older, sorry. But that didn't stop us from going to the beach and then camping in our state parks. We actually learned how to camp. My first camping trip was Carlsbad State Beach. We borrowed a Korean War tent and from our neighbors in Oaxaca and had a great time, amazing time. But we moved to Imperial Beach in 1971. Imperial Beach is the last town on the California coast. Think of what Corona Del Mar used to be like, or Hermosa, or Manhattan Beach. It's still a blue-collar beach town next to the US-Mexico border. It was much more of a Huntington-style biker beach town like Huntington was back in the 70s that you could read about in Kem Nunn's Tapping the Source. If you guys haven't read that, please do. And it's surrounded by open space and wetlands. And when I was a kid, there were plans to actually build a marina and high-rise condominiums there. And so, along with my friends and family, we took action to conserve it and sat in front of bulldozers. That's Brian Bilberry, became a congressman. It's my cross-country coach, Benny Holt, and my buddy Jack Burns on the surf team with me at our local high school. I was 16. We actually ended up getting beat up. That's my buddy Dave Parra there, grabbing a guy off of me, and the police sat there and watched. Pretty brutal to get beat up when you're 16 and you're trying to stop someone from destroying an estuary in a good surf spot, actually. But today it's a National Wildlife Refuge and a National Estuarine Research Reserve. And a lot like Newport Harbor and Newport Bay, it's one of the most important remaining coastal estuaries we have, right? And thank God we conserved it, because now we know with sea level rise and coastal flooding and all the flooding we get from the Tijuana River, thank God it's an estuary, right? And that's my favorite place to surf on the planet, and watching the sunrise over the sand dunes on the other side of that area, and surfing with dolphins and leopard sharks and birds, and of course my kids and people I've known my entire life, that's as good as it gets for me. I'd like to tell you I have aspirations to have lots of riches, etc., but it's for me, and I think we all know that feeling, right? That's as good as it gets, right? That feeling of being in place and having what my co-founder of Wild Coast, Wallace J. Nichols, written a book called Blue Mind. He'd be a great person to have come speak here. Talks this blue mind, right? You're in sync with the outdoors, in sync with these spaces. And so that really led to a career in conservation, lifeguarding first, lots of years in grad school, living in a trailer with my wife in Baja, California, in a little fishing village in a place called San Ignacio Lagoon, doing research on gray whales that turned into a book called Saving the Gray Whale. And really, what I have always wanted to know and then seek to answer and figure out is, what does conservation mean? How do you do it? And what does success look like, right? How do you get there? What does that mean, right? And at the end of the day, if you're in the ocean, it means the ocean is clean, right? It's hopefully, like Greg said, it's trash-free. It's sewage-free, and it's filled with wildlife. And what's interesting now, and the reason why Rich you can take these photos, is because of conservation, because we've stopped people from killing blue whales, because there's an amazing network of marine protected areas in Orange County with an incredibly passionate, committed group of folks that are helping to safeguard them. The city of Laguna has their own, I think, officer that helps protect the coast there, which is really great. And so you see these animals start coming back, including white sharks, which aren't always super fun. There's just a lot more people taking pictures in the ocean you're seeing a lot more sharks, but the fact is white sharks are coming back, and they're along the coast. And so my wife and I spent 2 years in the field in the early 90s as penniless grad students living in a trailer with my our Australian Shepherd Chip, studying gray whales and living with fishermen around whales, living with, like, my buddy Cheho, who lives in Magdalena Bay, which is in southern Baja, and the nicest, warmest, friendliest people on the planet. The people that have nothing that will give you everything. The people that live in literally plywood shacks with no running water and no electricity. Now, they might have, maybe electricity comes from solar panels, that are fishermen. They're whale watching guides. They're ranchers. They kill animals for a living. That's how they make their living. And it was a really incredibly moving experience to understand that if we want to do conservation in places like Baja and around the world, we have to work with people like Cheho. If we want to do conservation in Laguna Beach, we have to work with folks, with lifeguards and fishermen and divers and developers and real estate brokers and everyone else, restaurant owners, et cetera, and of course, obviously the city of Laguna Beach and the state of California. You just can't do it on your own. You can't just set up a reserve and then expect it to work, right? And so that human element of conservation is that intangible, how do we work on this, right? How do we do that? And that's something that I've been really doing at Wild Coast for the past 20 years, worked at the Nature Conservancy before that in the 90s, helped get my start helping set up national parks in the Gulf of California, in Isla Espiritu Santo. If you're a sailor, you might know that. And then in Loreto as well. And really, really amazingly beautiful places that are worth preserving. So let me make this really clear. The area in the Gulf of California and along Mexico's Pacific, as well as California's Pacific now, are considered the holy grail for ocean conservation. We now know that there is no other place on Earth where we see more migratory big animals. Rich, that's why you're seeing those big whales and you're seeing big sharks. There's big tuna offshore, big sea turtles swimming from Indonesia to Monterey, leatherback sea turtles. In the Gulf of California, the vaquitas, some of you have been following that, it's probably near extinction. But the bottom line is, in terms of island biodiversity, in terms of ocean biodiversity and abundance, this is the holy grail, right? If we can do conservation in these areas and help restore these areas, we can get a lot of conservation done and bring back things like sharks. And the fact is, sharks might be Jaws, because of Jaws, is this scary idea, but the fact is, sharks are a necessary part of the ocean. And we do have sharks here in Southern California along this California coast. We have leopard sharks in Imperial Beach. This is in Cuba, actually, where there's been a marine protected area that's not allowed fishing and sharks to come back. Cabo Pulmo of the Cape region off near Cabo San Lucas has tons of sharks as well. So that's a really good sign of ocean health. And a lot of good shark research going on in La Jolla, right off of Black's Beach. It's interesting to see a correlation between good surf spots and ocean biodiversity and abundance. And the reality is, generally a good surf spot is a reef, it's a river mouth, it's an estuary, it's a point. It's generally a place where you're going to see some sort of congregation of ocean wildlife, which is why a lot of them in Southern California now are protected as marine protected areas. These are leatherback sea turtles. In California, we get them from Indonesia. They're also swimming along the Pacific coast. This is in Oaxaca in a place called Barra La Cruz, which is one of the world's best surf spots. According to Surfer Magazine, an amazing place. And leatherbacks lay their eggs here. The females lay their eggs, but the males never come back to shore. They're out in the ocean, which is why they're so threatened by commercial fishing and long lining. And when I talk about fishing, you know, there's a difference between a guy with a spear gun and a guy men or women with a fishing pole and commercial industrial fishing trawlers that have 50 miles of nets, right? That's when we start thinking about how we're going to regulate fishing and deal with fishing. That's really what we're talking about. That's what ocean conservationists around the world are focused on. How do we deal with this industrial scale fishing? How do we make it more sustainable? Not how do we stop fishing, how do we make it more sustainable and work with the fishing industry? But amazing animals, this is the most important place in Mexico where they come back to shore. But everyone in this village used to eat these animals. Everyone in this village can tell you about every part of the animal that they ate. They can tell you about the oil that they would save and give to folks as like cod liver oil in the winter, right? Really interesting and really moving to see that this village, an indigenous village in Oaxaca, now depends on surfing and agriculture and fishing for its revenue, but they've pretty much given up killing sea turtles. So they kill a few, but not leatherbacks, so that's good. And so, you know, the question becomes, why should we care about the ocean? Well, these are my kids surfing Todos Santos Island off Baja, California. You know, at the end of the day, we are selfish. We should have the ocean around because it's an amazing place to enjoy life, right? That's more important than ever. If you're a diver, this is in Oaxaca, you know, it's important to not only go out in the ocean, but to see fish, right? And it's pretty sad to go out in a place that's been devastated by urchins. And there was a story in the New York Times the other day about Northern California, what's going on with urchins and the loss of kelp forests and real problem in abalone. But that's what we want to see in the ocean. We want to see an ocean filled with fish, with life. It's been really inspiring. I'm sure there's a lot of sailors here, and Newport's such an important sailing community. to see the sailing community globally and organizations and sailing races committed to ocean conservation and plastic-free oceans. That's something that I think sailors have been really good at articulating, that they're out offshore thousands of miles, in the middle of the ocean, and they're seeing this plastic out there. And they've had a really important voice in ocean conservation initiatives, which I find really, really inspiring. And I find these races across the ocean inspiring, but more importantly, because they're observing what they're out in and they're seeing the decline in wildlife in the ocean, but more importantly, the increase in pollution, again, they become important voices. And again, with fishermen, at the end of the day, these guys don't want their kids to fish. They don't want to throw a gill nut in the ocean and fish. They know there's less fish than ever. You can always talk to a fisherman in Baja and you know that they want to do something else. So what is that something else? Well, if there's nature around, they can do ecotourism, right? And so, because we have some issues to deal with. This is in the Tijuana River Valley, not too far from my house. Every time it rains, thousands of tons of trash and plastic wash in from the Tijuana River into the ocean. And this is going on in giant rivers around the world, whether it's in India or China, or around Latin America and predominantly Asia. That's where I think a lot of the plastic's coming from. But guess what? San Diego, the freeway is filled with garbage right now. We went on a jihad against Caltrans to say, you got to clean up your trash, and we're going to do a lot more on that. I'm furious about the amount of garbage along our highways. Start looking at highways in Southern California, you're going to see way too much trash, and there shouldn't be any. And my argument is, if I'm trying to work with Mexico to try to figure out how to clean up that, I can't have any trash on the US side of the border. So really, really important. I'm really obsessed with that. I've been to Australia and England the last 6 weeks, and no trash anywhere. No trash cans. No trash cans. Old school. Remember we used to be old school? We used to put our trash in our pockets. Some reason we don't do that anymore, but problem. Climate change and sea level rise, storms. So we've seen the destructive power of these storms. This storm, Hurricane Willa, that just hit Mexico, went in 24 hours from 40 miles an hour to 150 miles an hour. The warmest ocean temperatures in the world recently were off this coast. So that Oaxaca, Chiapas coast where the hurricane belt formed, that slammed the coast really hard. Luckily, not too many people were, I haven't heard the reports, but it sounds like wasn't as destructive as it could have been. And I know every surfer in Newport and person in Newport was watching the amazing waves we've had over the last, 2 months from the hurricanes that have hit Baja. But, I was at a meeting in San Diego and said to every elected official in San Diego, all the mayors, who's doing hurricane planning? And they thought it was a joke. But the fact is, we had 2 major hurricanes a few hundred miles from San Diego. Last one that hit was in the 1850s. They think if it hit, the equivalent of today would have been $500 million worth of damage. But we got lucky this summer that the water it was weird. We had some of the warmest temps ever, and I know all of you know that. It was up to 80 degrees in San Diego, at least La Jolla. And then it got cold. We had a lot of upwelling and stuff, which is kind of weird. So that's probably why the hurricanes didn't come further north. But we got lucky, and that made change, right? So, and then Montecito. I was in Montecito in January, and if any of you have family members or friends there that suffered, I'm really, really sorry. It was amazing to see the level of devastation and the tragedy that struck there. And what I saw when I saw this photo, and I thought it would have been even worse if they would have had 15 to 20 foot surf and a El Nino-like storm, right? Think about that, right? So we're all impacted now. It's not just somewhere else that it's happening. It's not just Puerto Rico or the Gulf Coast. It is California, wildfires and mudslides, and then these storms that happen, right? And then coastal flooding. There's no other place on the coast, and maybe I'm wrong, that gets more surf from the south and bigger waves than Newport. And there's no other place, and as I understand it from the folks at UC Irvine, that's seeing more coastal flooding on south swells than Newport. It's really interesting to see that. Whether or not these southern storms are stronger than they used to, it's very clear that we're all seeing the impacts of cumulative impact of sea level rise, or during the El Nino a few years ago when the ocean was a foot higher, definitely we saw thermal expansion, and we just saw more coastal flooding. I know I saw it in Imperial Beach. So, the reality is the ocean isn't going away. And the more resilient, the more abundant, the richer the ocean is, healthier, I mean, the better chance we have at dealing with these issues. We can't just engineer our way out of everything. We've got to figure out ways to conserve and restore our ocean ecosystems, right? And I'm a big believer in that. I think I'll talk about that just a little at the end, but you know, we have the opportunity now. We know where the development's going to be. We know what the things that we can do, and we know how we can restore watersheds, and we know that we can restore wetlands. We know that we can help improve kelp forest cover. We know that we can stop fishing in certain areas and the fish come back. So I think that's something I want you to think about as we show some of the successes. And you know, again, California is such an amazing, 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 rich state and offshore with our blue wilderness. And it's become more so in the last really 10 years because some of these species have come back. And because people like Barbara Block at Stanford University, she's kind of the guru of tagging these giant ocean animals. Stanford has a project where they're tagging ocean animals throughout the Pacific, and she's really the one who's really come together to said, California's it. You know, we're looking around the world in National Geographic and Blue Planet and et cetera, but the fact is, you know, California is one of the most important ocean migratory routes. And the blue whales that Rich is seeing off Laguna, we're seeing them off San Diego, they're offshore. They're going down to the Gulf of California. They're coming up and going around the Channel Islands. So really, really amazing animals, and we're so lucky to have them in California. Obviously, white sharks. No one wants to see this in the ocean, but people are. And you know, there's kind of a resident white shark that I heard in San Clemente this summer. And they're, you know, they're the Hermosa Pier and Manhattan Beach Pier. They're coming along through Newport, and they're going down to Camp Pendleton. And then they're going down to Guadalupe Island off of Baja, California, and going off to what they call the Shark Cafe and diving really deep. And scientists think they're feeding there. They're doing a lot of the satellite tagging. So really interesting animals. You know, my kids are 20 and 22, but I'm sure if you have kids that grow up on the beach, when they're groms, they saw a shark every other. They tell you this. First, they tell you they get 10-second tube rides, and then they tell you that they see sharks every other day. And so I was telling Barbara this, and she's like, well, you know what? They probably did see a lot of sharks because they're really out there. So I thought that was interesting. But we were in Australia last month in north of Sydney, about 4 hours, and I was going to go surf with my kids. We're on this beautiful beach, and they came running out of the water because they said a 6-foot white shark jumped out of the water. We're there. So anyway, and then what's interesting is the South San Diego Bay. We have 27,000 elegant terns nesting in South San Diego Bay. They fly over Imperial Beach every day. So, you know, really, really amazing. Whether it's the kelp forests and harbor seals off of Southern California, or really making sure that we're bringing back fish. And this is the key thing. The size of the fish in the ocean has gotten smaller as we take more big fish out of the ocean. And so really the goal of conservationists is to conserve the areas where fish are spawning. So you want to conserve those wetlands, you want to conserve those kelp forests, you want to conserve those rocky reefs, you want to conserve the estuary mouths, you want to conserve those areas where you see the fish spawning. So we have one of the probably most complete networks of marine protected areas in California, over 500,000 acres of underwater parks, including in Orange County, LA, San Diego County, all up and down the state. And the news from the Central Coast is that fish are coming back. The news from San Diego, and I was on surfing in La Jolla, South La Jolla this summer, never seen more fish in my life. It's in a no-take area. South La Jolla, big reef called Bird Rock, North Bird Reef, and I've never seen more fish anywhere in my life except in Baja in a marine reserve in Australia. It was amazing. Fish were around me everywhere. There's a lot of poaching going on as well. But really, really important to save the areas where fish are spawning. And then finally, why? You know, at the end of the day, we talked about this, but we do know that the most important memories and days of our lives, or best memories and days of our lives, have probably been on the beach. That it's really, really important to make sure that, again, everyone has that opportunity. These are kids from a Native American community in San Diego, never been to the beach before. And I want to make sure it's our goal at Wild Coast and with groups along the state, in addition to doing the conservation work, is to make sure that we get kids to the beach. We get kids in those junior lifeguard programs. We work with the YMCAs. We work with the Boys and Girls Clubs. We get kids from inner cities and inland areas out to the beach to make sure that everyone has this opportunity to make sure they put away their iPhones and they get to just have a great day. And it's, when we were all growing up, no one thought about that because there weren't those barriers. It was everyone at the beach, and now their families are working, 2 or 3 jobs. They can't get to the beach, and so it's really, really more important than ever. And so I want to talk about Mexico, and Mexico's always in the news, and generally it's always bad. The Mexico that I know and love, and I know James knows and loves, it's a very different place. It's a place of friendly, warm people. I'm sure many of you have great experiences and time in Mexico. And for conservationists, it's a place where we're getting a lot of conservation done. We're getting a lot done. We're really having a lot of success in the Gulf of California. We're seeing amazing animals like whale sharks. And one of the things that we're working on is really working to protect the coastline. So in partnership with the Mexican government, we have helped protect over 1,000 miles of coastal areas through coastal concessions that are deeded back to the National Park Service. And one of these areas that we're doing it is in 2 gray whale lagoons called Magdalena Bay and San Ignacio Lagoon. San Ignacio Lagoon is a part of a Mexican national park or Mexican protected area. Magdalena Bay, which is here, is a little bit further south. All the islands of Baja California are now protected as protected areas. And these are the areas that the gray whales go and give birth and mate in the winter. And so for us, not only has it been really important to help protect these areas, but to work in partnership with the fishing communities that are actually working in ecotourism. And so that's really, if you start looking at how the gray whale came back, there are 2 things. First, by the early 1900s, gray whales were considered to be extinct. Whalers had almost extirpated them out of the gray whale lagoons up until the 1880s. Close to 3,000 whales were killed in lagoons, mostly mothers and calves. So obviously, when you kill the population, this can help you bring back a population, continue your population. There's not much future for species. By 1950, there weren't that many left. And then they slowly started coming back because around 1950 is when people stopped hunting gray whales. And so you had these fishing communities around gray whale lagoons. And the thing that the Mexican government did really in the 1980s was they gave fishermen exclusive access to whale watching permits, so that the only people that can get permits to take tourists to see whales are Mexican fishermen and their families. That single-handedly revolutionized the conservation business because all of a sudden you had fishing communities, fishermen saying, get me out of the water, I want to work around whale watching, I don't want to, we're going to take 3 or 4 months off from the fishing, especially in the winter when it's not as good. And then number 2, yes, can't wait to make a living not killing something and taking people out to see whales. And that had a really significant impact on helping preserve San Ignacio Lagoon when the Mitsubishi Corporation was trying, in the 1990s, proposed building a huge industrial salt flat. The most ardent supporters of that lagoon and against that project is a big salt harvesting facility where the guys doing, and their families doing whale watching. It was really, really impressive to see that. And so these areas, in addition to having this local conservation community, we've now worked with local residents to help do conservation easements. We've helped do conservation concessions. And to really, and in San Ignacio Lagoon, we did a 140,000 acre conservation easement over collectively held, owned property they have, and what are called ejidos. But we set up an investment trust fund, like a foundation, so that money would be reinvested back in local businesses. So the money from the principal then, or the interest, goes back into funding their ecotourism businesses. They can still ranch, they can still hunt, they can still fish in the off season. Most of them are fishing pretty sustainably. And we even got rid of the 2-stroke engines that were the biggest source of pollution. People with 2-stroke engines, they were using a 2-stroke motor oil, and you see these yellow cans, oil bottles everywhere. And we got a loan program that they paid back in a year with their savings and gas for 4-stroke engines, which are cleaner and safer around whales. So been a lot of interesting things happen around these animals, which are amazing, that went from being devilfish in the 1800s to friendly whales now, primarily because we incentivized the economics of conservation. that people had a way to make a living. In Cabo Pulmo, which is 2 hours from Cabo San Lucas on the East Cape, a town of about 60 people. Anybody here been to Cabo Pulmo? You know how amazing it is. It's like a place back in time. You should all go. If you go to Cabo Pulmo. Really beautiful. 17,000 acre national park. And the fishermen decided to stop fishing 20 years ago. They gave up fishing. Imagine fishermen saying they give up fishing. A few years ago, Scripps Institution of Oceanography did a study and showed that in a 10-year period, fish came back 460%. It's probably 500% now. It's become the wonder place of the entire ocean. It's an amazing place. And it's like the Jurassic Park of the ocean. And so what biologists really think is it takes about 9 years for fish populations to really come back. Really, really impressive. In Oaxaca, in southern Mexico, this is south of Huatulco, and you can see there's 10,000-foot mountains in the distance. Very few people live here. It's all owned by indigenous groups, collectively owned. Very little development at all. People farm with oxen, very little pesticide use, and it's one of the most amazing areas on the planet in terms of abundance of marine life, sea turtles, and then reptiles and amphibians, frogs, and really important area for birds. It's also an incredible surf spot. Somehow I always manage to work in areas with lots of wildlife and the waves are really good, but don't tell anyone that. Well, olive ridley turtles were almost extirpated in Mexico. It used to be a commercial fishery for olive ridley turtles and all sea turtles in Mexico. That was stopped in the 1980s, and slowly turtles have come back. It was a directed trade, illegal trade for their eggs. People think the eggs are organic Viagra. And so we carried out a campaign with a famous model to convince men not to eat sea turtle eggs to have sex, which was actually pretty successful, and then got the Mexican military on the beach with machine guns. So in 2003, there were less than 2,000 turtles laying their eggs here every year. This year, we think there'll be about 2 million. This is one of the most abundant sea turtle nesting beaches in the world, and it's amazing how fast they've come back. On the other beach that just north of, actually south of Puerto Escondido, north of Huatulco, that was a big sea turtle nesting beach. Scarab beetle started, there was a scarab beetle infestation, and the scarab beetle started eating all the eggs, and so the population collapsed. So as that population collapsed, this beach became really, really popular. I was there last year with about 10,000 turtles arrived in a 4-hour period. Actually had some folks from Laguna there with us. I just got a WhatsApp from my staff coordinator, Luis, a really great kid who lives on the beach in a palapa, and great biologist, loves his work, and 100,000 turtles in one night, laying their eggs. Really, really amazing. And so we were there a few years ago, and when the population started exploding, and these are indigenous folks in an indigenous community, right? They live in palapas, they have oxen to do agriculture, and what they said to us is, we want to be the world's #1 sea turtle nesting beach. That was their aspiration, right? How awesome is that, right? And they made it happen. And I was with those folks last year. I'll be there in a few weeks, actually in a couple weeks. And they're so proud of their work, right? So proud of the work. And when there was an oil spill by Pemex, the Mexican national oil company, they went to Mexico City and protested outside of Pemex's annual convention. They have like an annual meeting every year. And when their police and security guards told them to leave, they just said, we're not. They were the most fearless and bravest and most courageous people I'd ever met because they're grounded in this reality, right? They have nothing else. This is what they have. So when they lose it, they have nowhere else to go. Yeah, it's amazing, amazing place. So I want to end it. I'm going to end it here talking about something that's really important called blue carbon. And so we start thinking about climate change and the efforts to decarbonize the global economy. Let's reduce carbon emissions. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It really doesn't. There are a lot of innovative ways we can do that. But what we're realizing on a global level is that the other missing element of addressing climate change and dealing with sea level rise and these more potent storms obviously is what we call natural climate solutions, preserving the coastal and ocean ecosystems that we already have. And so these are mangroves. We now know that mangroves sequester more carbon than any other ecosystem on the planet, these mangroves in Baja, California, and that they're an essential element in addressing climate change. It doesn't mean that we have to stop doing everything else, but that we have to do everything we can to conserve and restore every green and blue place on the planet. I was at the climate summit in San Francisco recently, and that's with all the famous celebrities that were in the main room with the governor. There was a bunch of us that do ocean conservation from around the world, and that was really the focus was, all right, what's our strategy for really helping restore and protect all these carbon sequestering ecosystems, whether they're kelp forests or coral reefs or mangrove forests or the salt marshes of Newport Bay, right? And the riparian forests of San Mateo Creek, right? That's important. We should be thinking about how we have all our own carbon farms. Every city could be monetizing carbon and sequestering carbon and possibly selling those for carbon credits. May not be big enough yet, but every student and every association and every city gets to be involved in that. And I think that's actually pretty exciting. It gives us a new way of thinking about how we can do conservation and how we can make a contribution. So if you're helping safeguard Newport Harbor, you're helping the fight for climate change. If you're helping protect kelp forests off of Orange County, that's part of the effort. But we need to start understanding, getting the data on what that means, right? And then we need to start, and there's a big focus on this right now in Southern California, restoring every creek, every watershed, every wetland, every estuary, expanding those kelp forests, really making sure we're doubling down on protecting what we have, right? It's more important than ever. Keeping the trash out of the storm drains, keeping all those industrial chemicals out of the storm drains, right? And so we're doing this in Mexico now. We've got a team of scientists. We're actually doing a workshop at Scripps Institution of Oceanography on this on Monday, and then a big conference in Ensenada on Tuesday. We've got scientists who are coming down and getting core samples of the soil below these mangroves and actually, again, doing these soil samples. And we're going to monetize these carbon, the mangroves for the carbon market, and then the Mexican government can sell carbon offsets. And basically, the idea is that, and what's happening around the world is European countries and industrialized countries have realized, essentially, if we want to save the Amazon, we have to help Brazil pay to do it. If we want to save the rainforest, we have to help do it. If Mexico wants to save these mangroves, the German government has been helping us do it. And so if we want to help save the climate, we need to restore Newport Harbor and San Diego Bay. And the Port of San Diego also gets this. It's actually pretty interesting, a lot of discussion going on about this. So, with that, I want to end here. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. We actually can make a difference if we're smart, if we're innovative, or if we're passionate. And we remember that at the end of the day, there is, except for the library, nothing more important that we can do than to spend a day, enjoy a day at the beach, bring people to the beach, protect the beach, protect our coast, and make sure that Rich and all his buddies and everybody else in Southern California and around the world can actually spend a day, no, seriously, looking at a blue whale, watching dolphins surf in the surf line, and helping even make that better. And it's totally possible. So thank you very much. So I'll take questions. Yeah, so, and does anybody have a microphone? Do we have a mic? Oh, good, okay. Because I'm a little hard of hearing, and so.
Can you explain how carbon credits work? I don't.
Yeah. So essentially, you don't ask for carbon market. So Walt Disney, the Disney company, right? They just paid Peru, I think it was $25 to $40 million to help save a part of the Amazon. So they need to offset some of their activities. This is all voluntary. It's a voluntary carbon market. And they might say, okay, we can offset the impact that we have, and so we're going to buy these carbon credits, and then we can verify. It's called Verified Carbon Standards. It's an international organization, and they're going to verify for us how much carbon that part of the rainforest is sequestering, or saving, right? And that's the thing now with the mangroves. No one's ever done this with mangroves. There's a group of us around the world that are working with the United Nations, and this is only recently that we figured out that these ocean ecosystems really store a lot of carbon. So now the thing we're doing is, we got money from Leo DiCaprio's foundation, which is in LA, and a very generous grant to help us do this. We have a scientist, they're leading on this in Australia. So Australians are a little bit ahead of on this. So we have an Australian scientist actually from Mexico that's coming on Sunday, and she's helping us figure this out. So that's what her research is. And a lot of research is going on in Scripps. So the idea here is, and this is why we save nature. It just gives us another reason to save nature. All right. So now, if you can make money saving nature, I'm all for it. Okay, all for it. Whatever it takes, I think that's the thing. But we're realizing that, and there's a good article in the New York Times about this, with the climate crisis and carbon emissions going the way they are, and the levels of carbon in the atmosphere, we need to figure out how to sequester every type of carbon we can, every amount of carbon we can. Everything is going to count. Yeah, so that's, I think, so the question is sort of the intrinsic, what gets added for people who haven't been to the ocean before. So again, Wallace J. Nichols wrote a book called Blue Mind. It's a New York Times bestseller science book. Really talks about there's some sort of physiological change that goes on in your brain, contact with water. And so he's trying to get people just to connect with water before the ocean. There's something about water that grounds us. Maybe it's about the fact that we're in the womb, but there's definitely scientists who have done research on this whole, the neuroscience of water. So he does a much better job of explaining it. But it's something about being enveloped. I think we all know that feeling you're enveloped in water. Everyone knows that I need to be in the water, for sure. I'm a lot calmer when I'm in the water. So, or whether it's even seeing the water, how we feel when we see that blue. So I get a blue mind. So I think that's really important. I'm just going to say it right now. We're also encumbered by stress and our iPhones and our schedules and social media and everything goes around us. Where's the one place we can disconnect, right? I mean, think about it, where we can just be free of that and sort of get grounded or get submerged, right? And that's important. We're realizing how important that is. We used to do that a lot more. We were encumbered by the iPhones all the time. That's why I love, I'm a 54-year-old guy that's trying to stay relevant in the water, but I just enjoy being out in the water, and just disconnected and talking to people, right? And hearing the wind and, watching the sunrise. All that stuff's more important though. It's really, really important. And we're realizing that we're losing that, right? We're getting people disconnected. So, anyway. Yes, Toby.
Could you tell us why you ran for mayor, and how did you do that?
So, I ran for mayor in 2014. I grew up in Imperial Beach, California. The question is why I ran for mayor.
Yes.
So, I ran for mayor. So I grew up in Imperial Beach, town of 28,000 people, blue-collar beach town. And we just had a series of administrations that just disconnected the community, the city from the community. So a lot of conflict. And it's in a blue-collar beach town, a lot of people don't go to city council meetings. When they do, if they get insulted, then they don't go back. And so we really just tried to bring the city back to the community. So we're a low-income beach city. We don't have the things that Newport has. We don't have a swimming pool. We didn't have a grocery store until recently. Our alleys weren't paved. We didn't have a lot of crosswalks. And so those are the kind of things you guys take for granted most of my residents didn't have. 25% poverty rate, 30% child poverty rate. So anyway, that's why I ran, and we've radically changed the city, brought over $100 million worth of investment, building a new swimming pool, expanding the skate park, built a new library, just doing the kind of things everyone takes for granted in the city. My residents and our kids and families really take for granted. The biggest thing we're working on is ocean pollution. We have a significant problem with the Tijuana River, and so we filed a lawsuit against the federal government on that, and really working hard. And James had been part of that process to really connect with Mexico to get Tijuana's sewage infrastructure fixed. Other questions?
In your opinion, what area in California's coastline is most in danger?
Well, it's a yin and yang. What's the most threatened, endangered coastline in Southern California? Anywhere that has an oil lease on it first, right? So the yin and the yang of Southern California, obviously we're very developed, but it's amazing that ocean wildlife have come back to Southern California, and then in Laguna and our marine protected areas, fish are coming back. So I think that's the yin and the yang. I don't think it's more about now, rather eliminating threats, overfishing. So that's a big thing in industrial and commercial fishing, and then protecting our marine protected areas, stopping oil drilling obviously is a huge deal right now, and then really reducing runoff in the ocean. I think if you look around the state, that's going on up and down the state. That's all of that is happening at the same time. But I think what's consistent in California is there's a real commitment to ocean protection. Real commitment, something I'm really proud of. But the same is going on in Oregon and Washington as well. There's a really good partnership among the 3 states on ocean conservation. Yes?
How do those countries that you mentioned,
I'm sorry?
how do the countries that you mentioned keep their city roads and country roads trash free? How do they get their population to observe that?
So I mentioned England and Australia being litter free, but I think there's really still pretty strict anti-litter laws. But what's happening, the European Union just passed a single-use plastic ban. So that's what's really happening. I think in the UK as well. It's happening in California, the plastic bag ban. It's still, ongoing. Really reduced the amount of plastic we see on the coast. So I think that has to be the yin and yang. We have to figure out ways to reduce single-use plastic when it's convenient. Move away from polystyrene, things that don't biodegrade. And then really, remember that ad with the Native American who turned out he was Italian, with the crying when he saw the trash? It was like the first grade environmental commercial. I think it was the 60s or 70s. We need that again. Honestly, I don't know about you, but San Diego's a garbage dump. It's horrible, and I don't know what Orange County's like. I know I see trash on the freeways. The whole state of California is covered in garbage right now. And Caltrans is not doing a good job, and it violates our clean water laws. And all that trash from the first rains get washed into our creeks and our watersheds and the ocean. It goes into storm drains and causes flooding. And so that's something we will be hammering Caltrans after the election at a press conference. And I'm already in discussion with them. We are going to go to war with, not war, but to say, hey guys, we don't know what's happened with Caltrans, but they have, unfortunately, that the whole issue of collecting trash on our highways has become a big problem. Obviously, the explosion of homeless camps, et cetera, has not helped, but I have a zero tolerance approach to trash, only because I think if you can't pick up trash, you have a hard time addressing climate change. Any other questions? Good. All right. Well, I have books here. Please, we have free annual reports for Wild Coast, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight.